over the past, I think it's about 10 days now that I've been thinking about this. And it came from having this conversation with someone close to me, but also I think I was at the gym when this dawned on me. The idea that you actually shouldn't tell someone to make the most of their career. Well, not entirely. Like, and with her, we're actually talking about her career. Like, she's at a bit of a crossroads and whatever else, and we're just having a conversation about what she's going through and whatever else. And I said, and she's just had a kid and stuff. So she really is in a an interesting place in her life. And I said to her, it's easy for people to say one should focus on their career, or one should focus on their family, or one should focus on this or that or the other. I think the answer should be you want to put your life together. You want to um, build a life. That's literally what you're doing, and you want to build the most optimal life for you, and what that actually looks like. Like, because part of what we then say to people, or part of the messaging is generally you should put your career first. And I say that even myself at times, like, you should put your career first, blah blah blah. The problem with putting your career first is the question of, okay, now that I've been putting my career first, where does this career fit into every other thing that needs to fit into my life? And then often most people don't have an answer to that. It's like, yes, you should have a career if you want one. You need a job. I mean, you need to make some form of income. So you need a job. Perhaps you can decide that you want to actually have a career. You want to really work at trying to make something of it. No problem. Where does that fit into everything else? If you decide that, okay, you'll probably need a significant other, if you decide that's what you want, okay, where do those two things fit in? Um, what about your health? Obviously, you want to be in the best possible shape in as far as your health is concerned. Um, what are you going to do about that? Are you going to be exercising? Are you going to be running? Are you going to be eating healthy? Like, what does that actually look like? Um, you might want to go to school. You want to get a bit more educated and whatever else, get some degrees and whatever else behind your name. Okay, where does that fit into everything else? How do you make these things fit? And that that in my opinion is what we ought to be saying to especially young people. Is like, what you're going to be doing over, let's say, once you finish your matric and whatever else, what you're going to actually be doing isn't getting a degree, it isn't getting a job, it isn't getting married, it isn't having kids. All of those things may happen, but what you don't want is for them to happen in isolation. Where do they fit in together? Like, how do you make sense of these things? How do you piece these things together? Because if you find yourself, and how do you piece them together optimally? Because if you find yourself in a situation where it's 20, 30 years down the line, let's say you spend all of that time dedicated to your job or your career or a company or your family, but that isn't all you wanted to be. Now you find yourself in a difficult place, because now you do not have the benefit of youth. You don't have the benefit of perhaps the energy that you used to have. And you spent it focusing on a singular thing that wasn't the only thing that mattered to you. Now you've got a problem, because you were told to focus on a singular subject. You're told to focus on a singular thing, not actually try and build a life. And I think that's really what we ought to be saying to people. Like, what you want to do is actually build a life, because and it's one of the things that I'm actually starting to realize and learn is, when you are able to basically optimally build a life, it gives everything else meaning. So if you decide that, let's say, for instance, you want to get healthier, maybe you want to lose weight, or you want to get into shape, or whatever it is that you may decide you want to do, or run a marathon, where does that fit into everything else? How do you fit that into everything else that needs to happen in your life? You need to be able to answer that question. If you want to advance your career, what does that actually look like? What will then need to happen over the course of the next 12, 24 months, 36 months? You know, what would then need to happen? How does everything else need to adjust to accommodate this new change or this new decision. Because that's what you're doing. You're trying to build an optimal life. So some things may need to be sacrificed, others not, or whatever else. But you start to realize, like once you start saying, I actually want to build an optimal life, then the question becomes one of, um, if I'm going to focus more on this, what am I going to neglect? Because that's inherently that's what focus is. Focus is not just deciding on what you're going to spend most of your time doing, it's also making the decision on what you're not going to actually invest time doing. So then you need to think about that. You need to think about what are the repercussions of not focusing enough on certain things. So if you decide, let's say you're going to start a business, no problem. First 5 years are going to be absolute hell, apparently. If that's the case, and you're going to be focusing on this thing, what are you going to ignore? And what will happen if this thing doesn't receive the type of attention you would need to give it in order for it to survive? Let's say it might be a relationship, might be a relationship with a significant other, it might be a relationship with friends, it might be a relationship with your kids. What happens, or even family, if you do not give this the necessary amount of attention? What happens? What might happen? And you should think about that, because many a times I think that this is part of what we don't necessarily learn or are actually taught, is this idea of counting the price. Is like, this is not just about what you're doing, it's about what it's going to cost you. And often your decision to do this, and this, I think it's an economics term, the idea of opportunity cost. The decision to do this means you now can't do that, you know. So um, you can decide that every day at 3 p.m. you're going to go to the gym, but if you're going to the gym at 3 p.m., you can't also be cooking at 3 p.m. You understand? So the idea, the decision to focus on a singular thing, or to focus on this, comes at the price of not being able to focus on something else, or it comes at the price of ignoring something else. Now, what happens if I ignore this thing for an hour or 2 hours, depending on how much time you want to spend at the gym? Or what happens if I now go decide to focus on this business for 3 years? This is going to come at the price of perhaps friendships. It's going to come at the price of this. Do I think the necessary investment in terms of focus on this thing is worth neglecting these other things, because you're trying to build an optimal life? You know, and that's what I say to that person. I'm like, I think that's one of the things I'm personally learning. Is like the idea of, yes, having a career is good, but it is not enough on its own. Like, there are people that get so much satisfaction from their careers that perhaps they don't need anything else. I haven't met anyone like that, but I can only assume that it's probably someone like that. But for the majority of us, it's not enough. Going to work, getting paid on whatever the day it is not enough. You need more. So what is that more? What does that actually look like? And I think this idea of you want to actually build an optimal life that you are satisfied with, that you actually enjoy being in, is basically all about that. It's all about, okay, where does this career fit into everything else that matters to me? Everything else that I'm not willing to sacrifice for this career. It might be a relationship, it might be having kids, it might be being able to travel, or it might be having a social life with friends and whatever else. All of those things, those are the things that you're unwilling to sacrifice. Now the question then becomes, okay, then what does that look like for your career specifically? Is it because obviously you're not going to be able to compete with someone who has dedicated their entire life to just their career? But the thing about it is, in as much as you might not be able to compete on just this one domain, you have optimally built your life in a way that satisfies you. You are satisfied with the life that you've actually built. And because of that, you don't need to worry about the fact that someone might have chosen a singular thing to focus on. I mean, if you're a mom or whatever else, and you also work, you're not going to spend as much time as a stay-at-home mom with a young kid and whatever. So, you know, yeah. So those are things like, it's one of those opportunity costs that you actually think about. It's like, okay, what is my optimal life that I would be happy to live in? What does that actually look like? It's not just treating your career in isolation, you know. And Furthermore, and this is where the question on careers comes in, is like, okay, if this is what I'm trying to do, if this is the type of life I'm trying to build, what does that actually look like? What does that mean for my job? What does that mean for the organization I'm in? What does that mean for my relationships? What does that mean for my health? What does that mean for my kids? What does that mean for everything else that actually matters to me in terms of lifestyle and all of those other things? Once you're able to think about, okay, I'm trying to build an optimal life, then you can start thinking in the context of, um, okay, so what am I willing to sacrifice? What am I not willing to sacrifice? And then how do I piece those things together? And I think that's something that we we should do. And I think we don't do it enough. I think we think too often in isolation. We think about our careers in terms of its advancement. We think about money, and in isolation, we think about all of these other things. But what we really want to do is actually think of these things together.